Welcome back to the Leukopak Lady. This is another episode where I discuss factors that affect leukopak variability and impact standardization efforts. Today, I'm going over the intra-donor factors that can cause variability between leukopaks from the same donor. This is an ongoing list of things I've learned throughout my work in the leukopak collection space. I'll touch on a few things today, but remember, many things I talked about on the last episode as differences that lead to variability in collections between donors can also create differences in collections from the same donor over time. And this is what makes both standardization and selecting the ideal donors so difficult in the world of allogeneic cell therapies. First, physiological and immunological changes in donors between collections, such as acute illnesses, create shifts in immune cell populations, increase cellular exhaustion, and alter activation states and cytokine profiles. If a donor received a recent vaccination, that can affect the PBMC population composition, activation status, and shift cytokine production for weeks while the donor is making an immune response to the vaccine. A female donor's hormonal cycle may be at a different place than her last donation, which could result in changes to the numbers of T cells and NK cells in her blood. I've talked a lot about chronic inflammation and how it affects the immune system systemically through oxidative stress and elevation of pro-inflammatory cytokines. It can also drive T cell exhaustion and alter responsiveness. In addition, shifts in the gut microbiome from diet or lifestyle changes can induce systemic and chronic inflammation. Next, lifestyle and environmental influences can affect the donor cells from one collection to another. Physical stressors like exercise intensity and sleep deprivation can change immune activity, such as suppressing cytotoxic functions and altering cytokine release. Chronic stress elevates cortisol and suppresses adaptive immunity, which T cells are a main player in. Diet and nutrition changes between collections can also lead to elevated anti-inflammatory markers, shift population distributions, and alter proliferation rates. Substance use leads to oxidative stress and changes in T cell and NK cell activity, and even alcohol in moderation can suppress immune cell function. And exposures to allergens or pollution can elevate granulocyte activation and induce oxidative stress. And I talked about collection and processing factors a little in the last episode in the context of collection to collection variability, but they still apply to variability among collections from the same donor. For example, differences in hydration and caffeine levels or medications can impact plasma volume, cell yield, and activation. The combination of these differences can be compounded by subtle changes in the collection parameters and operator, which could impact cell viability, activation, and stress on the cells. And of course, if everything else was equal, which is not likely to be, the donor just changes over time. Aging slowly impacts the immune system, causing drifts in proliferation and responsiveness of the cells, as well as the balance between memory and naive cell ratios, with memory cells being more desired but less abundant with age. Also, changes in how genes are regulated can shift immune composition and function over time. And so I know all of this makes it seem like an impossible feat to find and retain qualified donors that can serve as source material for the long-term needs of an allogeneic therapy program. But I have some tips for how I think this can be done. Collection centers can communicate openly with the qualified donor about these things and emphasize the importance of minimizing substance use, medication changes, and major diet shifts close to donation times. Also, keep those qualified donors on a regular collection schedule to minimize the chances of major changes ahead of a collection. Ask donors to keep the collection team in the loop if there are unavoidable or sudden changes, so they can be communicated to the developers and help support decisions about whether to continue collecting leukopaks from specific donors. Collect and cryopreserve multiple leukopaks from the same donor during times when no changes have occurred to their health or lifestyle to better guarantee the collected cells behave similarly over time. And developers and collectors should work continuously to keep a long list of reliable and qualified donors to provide source material for the ongoing needs of the program. The more the collection center is engaged with the donor and the more the donor knows about how their health and lifestyle can affect the ability of their cells to treat patients, the fewer changes are likely to occur without knowing. So come back next week for a very special episode of the Leukopak Lady. The journey of how a leukopak becomes an allogeneic therapy.